Order in the court. Court is now in session. The case before us. Michael Pay's The Edge of the World. This work by Michael Pay argues that the forgotten and the marginal peoples of the North Sea, such as Frisian traders, Turpan farmers, drowned porters who nobody remembered, the losers, are the ones who truly and quietly built the modern world. And in Pye's own words, they made us possible. For much better and for much, much worse. Today, we will hear both sides of the argument. Counsel, you may proceed. Your Honor, the defense wants you to believe that these are footnotes to real history. Rather, I say they're the origin story. Take, for example, Exhibit A, Wardrobe. These are a legal system that puts an exact value on human life. Quote unquote by Michael Pay, life itself had a price. That's not folklore, that's not something made up, that's a law. And we can still check those numbers today, they're still verifiable. It's one of the earliest examples of anything resembling modern tort law. The fact that damages are fixed by category and not by sentiment or feeling. Exhibit B, the Frisians. While the rest of the early medieval Europe was still trading ceremonial gifts to keep kings loyal, like we do today, the Frisians already reinvented money as something to actually use. Not something to bury, not something to show your level of wealth to a future archaeologist or to take your wealth with you, but something to use. They built the first real trade economy in the region and then taught it to the Franks using that money. They ran a monopoly on flat-bottom boats, on trade routes, on the very idea of a market economy, centuries before anyone thought that was something impressive or some feat. Then finally you have Exhibit C, Bede, one of the greatest minds, in my opinion, that we've seen. He was sitting in a monastery in Northumbria. I think it's how you pronounce it. Forgive me if I'm wrong. But he worked out the mathematics of the calendar really well. Well enough that we still use his dating system today, and centuries later. Nicole, or Zemo, was using ratios and proportions to kind of argue the ethics of coinage, real math, in direct service of the economy and theological theory. This is not a footnote, rather I would argue that this is the cornerstone and the scaffolding of how we think about money and value today. Even the book trade itself makes this argument, proves the point. Monks such as Bede treated books not as something to be put in a box, put in a museum exhibit, to be put in the Louvre and looked at and glorified, but rather as practical tools, meant to be copied, shared, shipped out. This idea that knowledge is meant to move, not sit still. The idea that it's supposed to be between peoples, not one family, is one of the most consequential exports of this entire marginal world. But none of this was central to anybody's story of triumph at the time. That's the point. The margins were not decorated on the edge of history. Rather, it's where the actual work got done. Your Honor, my colleague makes his argument sound airtight, but in reality it just isn't. Pye himself writes that together they tell a story that was almost lost, as the story of losers tend to be. It's a quote. Okay, fine. But if the loser stories are mostly lost, how confident can Pye really be in reconstructing what they believed, what they intended, how they saw the world? He's filling these gaps with narrative momentum, but not always with sources, reliable, verifiable, trustworthy sources. Look at the way that he treated trials by ordeal, or his claim about what everyone believed that the sea contained. You can't make a claim like that. That's too vast, that's too broad, that's too reaching. Look at a quote from him. I don't remember the page number, but it goes, "Plague justified the rules that kept a person in her place." This was the final line of the Plague Laws chapter. This is a sharp point on its own, yes. But once he stretches it into comparison with modern terrorism that the medieval evidence simply cannot support, it makes me question things. It's not an isolated slip either, it's a pattern. Pye reaches for a bold, present-day parallel right at the moment his primary sources begin to thin out. Notice who's actually speaking in the book. Merchants, monks, kings, lawgivers, Bede, Charlemagne, Oresme, powerful people. These are the sources that are named, people that are wise, people that are intellectuals. The enslaved men and women that were shipped through Frisian in Norse trade routes, the ordinary peasants working the Turpin, the porters, the woman left waiting at home in the 9th century poems he quotes. They appear as objects and as secondary to these other people and their decisions, never as sources in their own right. Even his strongest chapters lean on documents written by the literate elite about everyone else. A wardrobe table tells you what a life actually meant to the person living it. A good story about the margins is not the same thing as proof that the margins ran the show, by any means. I want you to dwell on that. I want you to really think about that.